The difference between people who crumble under pressure and those who thrive in chaos has nothing to do with genetics, upbringing, or natural talent. What if I told you that mental toughness, that unshakable quality you see in elite performers, successful entrepreneurs, and people who seem to handle anything life throws at them, is not something you're born with, but something you can systematically train? Most people believe that some individuals are simply wired to be mentally strong, while others are destined to break under pressure. They think resilience is a fixed trait, like eye color or height, that you either have or you don't. This belief is comfortable because it absolves them of responsibility. If mental toughness is genetic, then there's nothing to be done about their own weakness. They can stay stuck and blame their parents, but here's the brutal truth. Mental toughness is a skill, and like any skill, it can be developed, strengthened, and mastered through the right training methods. This means your current level of mental toughness is not your destiny. It's simply where you are right now, on a development journey that can take you as far as you're willing to go. The people who stay calm when everything falls apart, who push through when everyone else quits, who maintain clarity when chaos surrounds them, they weren't born that way. They trained their minds to operate differently. They rewired their neural pathways through specific practices that you're about to learn. They faced challenges that broke others and emerged stronger because they understood how to use pressure as a growth stimulus rather than a destructive force. Think about the most mentally tough person you know. Whoever comes to mind, I guarantee they weren't born with some special gene that made them resilient. They developed their toughness through experience, often through experiences they didn't choose, that forced them to adapt or be destroyed. The difference is that you don't have to wait for random life circumstances to force mental toughness development. You can systematically create the same adaptations through deliberate practice. By the time you finish this audiobook, you will understand exactly how mental toughness works at the neurological level. You will have a complete system for training your mind to stay unshakable in any situation. You will know how to transform pressure into fuel, setbacks into advantages, and fear into focused action. This isn't motivational fluff or feel-good philosophy. This is the science of mental training backed by neuroscience and psychology research, proven by the most demanding environments on Earth, from special forces operations to Olympic competition to high-stakes business. And it will change how you respond to every challenge you face for the rest of your life. Chapter 1. The mental toughness myth that keeps most people weak. Here's what most people get completely wrong about mental toughness. They think it means never feeling fear, never experiencing doubt, and never wanting to quit. They imagine mentally tough people as emotionless robots who don't feel pressure the way normal humans do. This misconception is devastating because it sets an impossible standard that no one can achieve, and it blinds people to what mental toughness actually is. You've probably looked at someone who handles pressure with apparent ease and thought they must be wired differently. You've watched people perform under circumstances that would make you crumble and assumed they possess something you don't have. But this assumption is completely false. It's a story your mind tells you to explain why you struggle while others seem to thrive. The truth is far more empowering and far more demanding. Mental toughness is not the absence of negative emotions. It's the ability to function effectively despite those emotions. Mentally tough people feel fear, doubt, anxiety, and the urge to quit just like everyone else. The difference is what they do with those feelings. They experience the emotion, acknowledge it, and then choose their response, rather than being controlled by automatic reactions. This distinction is crucial because most people spend their lives trying to eliminate negative emotions before they can perform. They wait until they feel confident to take action. They wait until fear subsides before making decisions. They wait until doubt disappears before committing to goals. This waiting game is a trap that guarantees failure because the feelings they're waiting to disappear are actually hardwired survival responses that will never completely go away. Your brain is designed to generate fear when facing uncertainty, doubt when attempting difficult tasks, and anxiety when stakes are high. These responses kept your ancestors alive when predators lurked around every corner. But in the modern world, they mostly keep you stuck, playing small, and avoiding the challenges that would lead to growth and success. Mentally tough people have learned to operate with these feelings rather than waiting for them to disappear. They've trained their nervous system to function under stress rather than being shut down by it. They've developed what researchers call stress inoculation, the ability to perform under pressure because they've systematically exposed themselves to pressure during training. The first step in developing real mental toughness is accepting that you will always feel uncomfortable emotions when facing challenges. Stop trying to eliminate fear and start learning to act despite fear. Stop waiting for confidence and start building confidence through action. Stop hoping doubt will disappear and start proving doubt wrong through performance. This mental shift alone puts you ahead of 90% of people who spend their entire lives waiting for feelings that will never come. Chapter 2. The neuroscience of breaking points and how to push past them. Your brain has a built-in mechanism designed to stop you from pushing too hard. It's called the governor, and it works like the speed limiter in a car, shutting down your efforts before you reach your true limits. This governor exists for good reason. It protects you from destroying your body through overexertion. But here's the problem. In most people, this governor is set far too conservatively. It stops them at 50 or 60% of their actual capacity, convincing them they've given everything when they've barely scratched the surface. This conservative setting made sense when our ancestors faced genuine physical threats that could result in death. If you're being chased by a predator, you need reserves for the final sprint to safety. If you're fighting an enemy, you need energy remaining for the unexpected. But in the modern world, these life or death physical situations are rare. What remains is a protective mechanism calibrated for dangers that no longer exist, holding you back from challenges that pose no real threat to survival. Research on endurance athletes has revealed something fascinating. When people feel completely exhausted, when their muscles are burning and their lungs are screaming and every fiber of their being says they cannot continue, they typically have 30 to 40% more capacity remaining. Their brain is lying to them, telling them they're at their limit when they're nowhere close. Studies at the University of Cape Town demonstrated this conclusively. Athletes who felt completely depleted were shown to have significant untapped physiological resources. Their bodies were capable of continuing, but their brains had decided to stop them. The brain sends quit signals not based on actual physical limits, but based on perceived threat to the organism. Your brain doesn't wait until you're actually in danger. It anticipates danger and stops you well before you approach real limits. This same principle applies to mental challenges, not just physical ones. When you feel overwhelmed by a project, when stress seems unbearable, when you're convinced you can't handle any more pressure, your brain is likely exaggerating to protect you. You have more capacity than you believe. Understanding this neurological reality is the foundation of mental toughness training. Once you know your brain is designed to quit early, you can start questioning its signals. When your mind says, "I can't," you can respond with "prove it," instead of accepting the statement as fact. This doesn't mean ignoring genuine warning signs or pushing into actual danger, but it means developing a healthy skepticism toward your brain's comfort-seeking impulses. The governor can be recalibrated through deliberate exposure to discomfort. Every time you push past the initial quit signal and discover you can continue, you teach your brain that its limits were wrong. Over time, this recalibration allows you to operate at higher and higher levels of stress without triggering the shutdown response. This is exactly what Special Forces training accomplishes. By repeatedly pushing candidates past their perceived limits in controlled environments, instructors reset their mental governors to more accurate settings. The candidates learn they can function while cold, exhausted, scared, and stressed because they've proven it to themselves over and over again. You can apply the same principle to your own life by systematically seeking out challenges that trigger the quit impulse, then continuing past it. Start small, with minor discomforts that you would normally avoid. Take cold showers, hold uncomfortable positions, work past the point where you feel like stopping. Each small victory recalibrates your governor slightly, building your capacity for bigger challenges. Chapter 3. The 3 Pillars of Unbreakable Mental Strength. Mental toughness rests on 3 psychological pillars that support each other and create an integrated system of resilience. When all 3 pillars are strong, you become nearly unbreakable. When anyone is weak, the entire structure is compromised. Understanding these pillars allows you to identify your vulnerabilities and strengthen them systematically. Most people try to build mental toughness randomly, addressing whatever seems important in the moment. This scattered approach produces inconsistent results because it ignores the architectural reality of psychological strength. You cannot build a strong structure by strengthening random points. You must strengthen the load-bearing elements that hold everything else together. The first pillar is self-efficacy, your belief in your ability to handle challenges and produce desired outcomes. Self-efficacy isn't general confidence, but domain-specific belief based on experience and evidence. You develop high self-efficacy by accumulating proof that you can perform under pressure, solve problems, and overcome obstacles. Every challenge you face and survive becomes evidence that strengthens this belief. Psychologist Albert Bandura's research demonstrated that self-efficacy is the single strongest predictor of performance across virtually every domain studied. People with high self-efficacy attempt more difficult challenges, persist longer in the face of obstacles, and achieve more than those with low self-efficacy, even when objective ability is equivalent. Your belief about whether you can handle something determines whether you will handle it. People with low self-efficacy interpret challenges as threats they cannot handle. They avoid difficulty, give up quickly when things get hard, and attribute failure to permanent personal limitations. People with high self-efficacy interpret the same challenges as tests they're equipped to pass. They engage with difficulty, persist through setbacks, and attribute failure to strategy errors that can be corrected. The interpretation makes all the difference. The second pillar is purpose, a clear sense of why you're doing what you're doing that transcends immediate comfort and pleasure. Purpose provides the motivation to push through when the work stops being enjoyable and starts being painful. Without purpose, you have no compelling reason to suffer, and suffering is an inevitable part of any significant achievement. Purpose doesn't have to be grandiose or world-changing. It can be as simple as providing for your family, proving something to yourself, or developing your full potential. What matters is that the purpose connects to something larger than momentary comfort and provides fuel for the hard moments. Purpose transforms pain from pointless suffering into meaningful sacrifice, and humans can endure almost anything when they believe it serves a worthy cause. The third pillar is adaptability, the ability to adjust your approach when circumstances change rather than rigidly clinging to plans that no longer work. Mental toughness isn't about stubbornly pushing forward regardless of feedback. It's about persistently pursuing goals while flexibly adjusting methods based on reality. Adaptable people can pivot when their original strategy fails. They can find alternative paths when obstacles block the direct route. They can extract lessons from setbacks and apply them immediately. This flexibility prevents the frustration and despair that come from repeatedly hitting the same wall with the same approach. When all three pillars are developed, you become someone who believes you can handle challenges, has compelling reasons to face them, and can adjust your approach as needed. This combination produces genuine mental toughness that sustains performance under any conditions. Chapter 4. Stress Inoculation Training. Building immunity to pressure. The military discovered decades ago that you cannot prepare people for high-stress situations by talking about stress or teaching relaxation techniques alone. You must expose them to gradually increasing levels of stress while teaching them to perform specific skills under that stress. This process, called stress inoculation training, creates what researchers describe as psychological antibodies against pressure, allowing trained individuals to maintain performance in situations that would overwhelm untrained people. The concept emerged from observing a puzzling phenomenon. Soldiers who had received extensive classroom training on handling combat stress often performed poorly in actual combat. Meanwhile, soldiers who had less formal training but more realistic exposure to simulated stress performed significantly better. The difference was not knowledge, but experience. The soldiers who practiced under stress had neural pathways trained for stress, while those who only learned about stress in classrooms had pathways trained for comfort. Stress inoculation works because your nervous system adapts to whatever you repeatedly expose it to. If you only practice skills in calm, comfortable conditions, your nervous system learns to perform those skills only under calm conditions. When stress arrives, the unfamiliarity itself becomes disruptive and performance collapses. But if you practice skills while gradually increasing stress, your nervous system learns to perform those skills across a range of conditions. You develop what's called automaticity under load, the ability to execute trained responses even when your cognitive capacity is compromised by stress. Think about learning to drive. When you first learned, every action required conscious attention. Checking mirrors, using turn signals, monitoring speed, navigating traffic. All of this consumed your mental bandwidth. But with practice, these actions became automatic, allowing you to drive while conversing, listening to music, or thinking about other things. The same progression must happen with mental toughness skills. They must become automatic through repeated practice under stress, so they're available when your conscious cognitive resources are overwhelmed. This is why simulation training is so effective for pilots, surgeons, and military personnel. By practicing critical skills in simulated high-stress environments, they build neural pathways that function under real pressure. When emergencies occur, they don't freeze or panic because their nervous system recognizes the stress state from training and knows how to operate within it. You can apply stress inoculation principles to any area of your life. Public speaking terrifies you because you've never practiced speaking while feeling nervous. You've only imagined speaking when you felt calm, which provides no preparation for the reality of standing before an audience. Instead, practice your presentations while intentionally increasing your stress through exercise, time pressure, or artificial constraints. Train under conditions that simulate real pressure. Difficult conversations paralyze you because you've only rehearsed them in your head where nothing goes wrong. Instead, role-play challenging interactions with a trusted friend who pushes back, asks hard questions, and creates real interpersonal tension. Train your nervous system to navigate conflict, not just imagine navigating it. The principle applies universally. Whatever challenge you face, you can inoculate yourself against its pressure by deliberately practicing under gradually increasing stress until the actual event feels familiar rather than overwhelming. Chapter 5. The 40% Rule. Accessing your hidden reserves. Navy SEAL training has produced an insight that transforms how we understand human performance. Instructors noticed that when candidates felt they were at their absolute limit, completely depleted and ready to quit, they actually had roughly 40% more capacity remaining. This observation became the 40% rule, the recognition that when your mind tells you you're done, you're only about 60% of the way to your actual limit. This discovery emerged from watching thousands of candidates go through Hell Week, the most brutal phase of SEAL training. Instructors would see candidates convinced they couldn't take another step, couldn't stay awake another minute, couldn't endure another second of cold. And yet, when pushed past their perceived breaking point, these same candidates would continue for hours or days beyond what they believed possible. The breaking point was an illusion created by a brain trying to protect them from discomfort. This rule doesn't suggest you're always operating at 40% below your maximum. It refers specifically to those moments when you feel completely depleted, when your mind is screaming that you cannot continue, when every signal says you've given everything. In those moments, your brain is lying to protect you, and you have substantial reserves remaining. The lie is well-intentioned. Your brain is trying to maintain a buffer against genuine emergencies. But in most situations, this protection is unnecessary and keeps you from reaching your potential. Understanding this principle intellectually is the first step. Experiencing it personally is what creates transformation. The first time you push past what you believed was your limit and discover you can continue, something fundamental shifts in your self-perception. You realize you've been underestimating yourself your entire life. This discovery changes everything about how you approach challenges. You stop trusting the quit signals that once seemed reliable. You develop a healthy skepticism toward your own perceived limitations. You start asking whether you're really at your limit or whether your brain is just seeking comfort. The 40% rule explains why some people seem capable of superhuman efforts. They're not actually superhuman. They've simply learned to access more of their actual capacity, while others stop at the brain's conservative safety limit. They've experienced their reserves enough times that they've lost faith in the quit signals that stop everyone else. To access your 40%, you must be willing to enter the discomfort zone beyond your first quit impulse. This requires practice because your brain generates powerful resistance to continuing past its preferred stopping point. The quit signals include physical sensations, emotional urges, and compelling mental narratives about why stopping is the right choice. Learning to recognize these signals as information rather than commands is the key skill. When you feel the urge to quit, acknowledge it without obeying it. Say to yourself, "This is the quit signal, not a genuine emergency." Then commit to continuing for a specific increment, whether that's another 5 minutes, another repetition, or another page. Often, you'll find that pushing past the initial signal leads to a second wind, where the discomfort temporarily decreases. Each time you successfully access your reserves, you recalibrate your brain's understanding of your limits. Over time, your baseline capacity increases because you've proven to yourself that you can operate at higher levels than you previously believed. This is how ordinary people develop extraordinary mental toughness through repeated exposure to their own hidden potential. Chapter 6. Reframing pressure. Turning stress into fuel. Most people experience stress as a threat that degrades their performance. Their heart races, their palms sweat, their breathing becomes shallow, and they interpret these sensations as signs that something is wrong, that they're not ready, that they're about to fail. This interpretation triggers additional anxiety that compounds the original stress, creating a downward spiral that often leads to exactly the failure they feared. This spiral is so common that most people consider it inevitable. They believe stress naturally leads to poor performance, as if the relationship were hardwired and unchangeable. But research in performance psychology has revealed something remarkable. The relationship between stress and performance is not determined by the stress itself. It's determined by how you interpret the stress. Your beliefs about stress change what stress does to you. But here's what research has revealed. The physiological symptoms of stress and excitement are nearly identical. The racing heart, the heightened alertness, the flood of adrenaline. These responses prepare your body for peak performance, whether you're facing a threat or an opportunity. The difference between anxiety and excitement is largely in how you label the experience. Harvard researchers conducted a study where participants were told their stress response was helpful rather than harmful before taking a challenging test. These participants showed improved cardiovascular efficiency, maintained better cognitive function, and performed significantly better than those who received no such instruction. The physiological response was the same, but the interpretation changed the outcome. People who interpret their stress response as excitement rather than fear experience significant performance improvements. Their bodies are having the same reaction, but their minds are framing it differently. And that frame determines whether the energy becomes debilitating anxiety or enhancing arousal. Your heart pounds the same way whether you're terrified or thrilled. The sensation is identical. What differs is what you make it mean. This reframing isn't self-deception or denial. It's accurate perception of what stress actually does. Your body is mobilizing energy, sharpening focus, and preparing for action. Whether that preparation helps or hurts depends entirely on whether you interpret it as readiness or as danger. Elite performers have learned to welcome stress symptoms as signs that their body is preparing to perform. When they feel their heart pounding before a competition or presentation, they think, "Good, I'm ready," rather than "something's wrong." This interpretation allows them to channel the stress energy productively rather than fighting against it. You can train yourself to reframe stress through deliberate practice. Start by noticing your stress symptoms without judgment. Observe your racing heart, your tense muscles, your alert mind. Then consciously label these symptoms as preparation rather than fear. Tell yourself, "This is my body getting ready to perform at a high level." Over time, this reframing becomes automatic, and stress becomes fuel rather than obstacle. Chapter 7. The controlled breathing system for instant calm. Your breath is the one autonomic function you can consciously control, and this access point gives you direct influence over your nervous system state. When you're stressed, your breathing becomes shallow and rapid, signaling danger to your brain and maintaining the stress response. When you deliberately slow and deepen your breath, you send safety signals that activate your parasympathetic nervous system and calm the stress response. This isn't just relaxation advice, it's neurological reality. Your vagus nerve, which regulates your stress response, is directly influenced by breathing patterns. Long, slow exhales stimulate vagal tone and shift your nervous system from fight or flight to rest and digest. This shift happens within seconds and can be reliably produced with specific breathing techniques. The most effective breathing pattern for instant calm is called box breathing or tactical breathing, used by military and law enforcement personnel in high-stress situations. The pattern is simple. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, exhale for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, then repeat. This rhythm creates a predictable pattern that your nervous system finds calming, and the holds between breaths prevent hyperventilation while maximizing the calming effect. For deeper stress reduction, You can extend the exhales longer than the inhales. Inhale for 4 counts and exhale for 6 to 8 counts. The longer exhale maximizes vagal stimulation and produces more rapid calming. This pattern is particularly useful when you have time to prepare before a stressful event, as it can significantly reduce baseline anxiety within a few minutes. The key to making breathwork effective is practice. If you only try to control your breathing when you're already stressed, you'll find it difficult to remember the technique and execute it properly. But if you practice daily during calm moments, the pattern becomes automatic and accessible even under pressure. Your nervous system learns to respond to the breathing rhythm, making it a reliable tool when you need it most. Practice box breathing for 5 minutes each morning as a daily training exercise. Additionally, use it before known stressful events to prepare your nervous system. During unexpected stress, even a few controlled breaths can prevent escalation and maintain your capacity for clear thinking. This simple tool, requiring no equipment and no special conditions, gives you significant control over your stress response in any situation. Chapter 8. Cognitive Restructuring. Changing the thoughts that weaken you. Your thoughts create your emotional reality. The same situation can feel terrifying or exciting, overwhelming or challenging, depending entirely on how you interpret it. Most people let their thoughts run unchecked, accepting whatever narrative their mind generates as truth. This default mode keeps them vulnerable to thought patterns that increase stress, decrease confidence, and undermine performance. Cognitive restructuring is the systematic process of identifying problematic thought patterns and replacing them with more accurate, helpful alternatives. This isn't positive thinking or denial. It's correcting the cognitive distortions that make situations seem worse than they are, while developing more realistic, balanced perspectives that support effective action. The most common distortions that undermine mental toughness include catastrophizing, making mountains out of molehills, and imagining worst-case scenarios. All or nothing thinking, seeing situations as complete success or complete failure with nothing in between. Mind reading, assuming you know what others think, usually negative. Fortune-telling, predicting failure before you've even tried. Personalization, taking responsibility for things outside your control. Each distortion creates unnecessary suffering and impairs performance. When you catastrophize about a presentation, you increase anxiety beyond what the situation warrants. When you engage in all or nothing thinking, you rob yourself of the motivation that comes from partial progress. When you mind-read negative judgments, you undermine your confidence without evidence. Restructuring begins with awareness. You must notice the distorted thought before you can change it. Start paying attention to your internal narrative, especially in stressful situations. When you notice a thought that increases stress or decreases confidence, examine it for distortions. Ask yourself, what evidence supports this thought? What evidence contradicts it? What would I tell a friend who had this thought? And what's a more balanced way to view this situation? Then deliberately replace the distorted thought with a more accurate alternative. If you're catastrophizing about a presentation, replace "this will be a disaster" with "I've prepared well and can handle whatever happens." If you're engaging in all or nothing thinking, replace "if I don't succeed perfectly, I've failed with any progress is valuable, and I can learn from imperfect attempts." This replacement process feels awkward at first because the distorted thoughts have been running unchecked for years. But with practice, you develop the ability to catch and correct distortions quickly, preventing them from spiraling into anxiety or despair. Over time, more balanced thinking becomes your default, and you become naturally more resilient to the thought patterns that weaken most people. Chapter 9. Building your mental toughness morning routine. The first hour of your day sets the psychological tone for everything that follows. Most people start their mornings in reactive mode, checking phones, responding to demands, and letting external circumstances dictate their mental state. This approach guarantees that you'll face the day's challenges from a position of weakness rather than strength. From the moment their eyes open, they're at the mercy of notifications, news, and other people's agendas. Their morning belongs to everyone but themselves, and they wonder why they feel overwhelmed and depleted before noon arrives. A mental toughness morning routine proactively builds the psychological foundation you need to handle whatever comes. It's not about productivity hacks or getting more done. It's about preparing your nervous system and mindset to operate at peak effectiveness under pressure. When you control your morning, you establish a psychological momentum that carries through the day. You prove to yourself before you've faced any external demands that you're capable of doing hard things by choice. The foundation of an effective morning routine is voluntary discomfort. Starting your day with something challenging, before you have to face anything difficult, builds psychological momentum that carries through the day. A cold shower is the simplest and most effective morning discomfort practice. It triggers your stress response, forces you to regulate your breathing and mindset, and proves to your brain within minutes of waking that you can handle hard things. The cold shower works because it's genuinely uncomfortable and requires genuine mental effort to complete. Unlike many morning practices that are pleasant or neutral, the cold shower demands something from you. It requires you to override your brain's preference for comfort and choose discomfort deliberately. This choice strengthens the same mental circuits you'll need later when facing unexpected challenges. The psychological carryover from morning cold exposure is remarkable. When you've already done something difficult by choice, the challenges that arise later feel more manageable by comparison. You've already proven your capacity for handling discomfort, so your brain calibrates its responses accordingly. The difficult conversation, the challenging project, the frustrating situation, none of them seem as threatening when you've already conquered resistance once today. After voluntary discomfort, spend time on mental preparation. This includes visualization of upcoming challenges, rehearsing how you'll respond to difficulties, and affirming the mindset you want to carry into the day. See yourself remaining calm under pressure, handling setbacks with resilience, and performing at your best regardless of circumstances. This mental rehearsal primes your brain to actually produce these responses when situations arise. Include breathwork in your morning routine to establish nervous system baseline. 5 to 10 minutes of controlled breathing, especially box breathing, down-regulates your stress response and creates a calm, focused state that persists for hours. This baseline means you start the day further from your stress threshold, giving you more capacity before pressure becomes overwhelming. Finally, review your purpose and priorities before engaging with the day's demands. Connect with why you're doing what you're doing, what matters most, and what you're trying to build or achieve. This connection provides motivational fuel that sustains effort through the difficult moments that inevitably arise. A complete mental toughness morning routine might take 30 to 60 minutes, but the investment pays dividends throughout the day in improved performance, better stress management, and sustained psychological energy. Chapter 10. The Art of Compartmentalization. Keeping problems in their place. One of the most destructive patterns for mental toughness is letting problems bleed into every area of your life. When work stress follows you home, when relationship issues affect your job performance, when one setback poisons your entire day, you become unable to function effectively anywhere because everywhere is contaminated by problems from somewhere else. Compartmentalization is the skill of containing problems within their appropriate boundaries, giving each area of life focused attention when appropriate while protecting other areas from contamination. This isn't denial or suppression, it's strategic attention management that allows you to remain effective across multiple life domains. Effective compartmentalization requires clear mental boundaries between different areas of your life. You must define when you're in work mode versus family mode versus personal development mode, and commit to fully engaging with each domain during its designated time while releasing concerns about other domains. This requires trust that you'll address those concerns during their appropriate time, so your mind doesn't need to keep reminding you. The process begins with scheduled worry time and problem-solving time for each domain. If you know you have 30 minutes each evening dedicated to thinking about work problems, your brain can release those concerns during family time because it trusts they'll be addressed. If you know you have a weekly relationship check-in, your mind can stop ruminating on relationship issues during work hours because they have a designated space. Transitions between domains require deliberate rituals that signal the shift to your brain. This might be a physical action like changing clothes, a mental action like 3 deep breaths and a statement of intention, or an environmental change like leaving one location for another. These rituals create psychological separation that makes compartmentalization more effective. When problems intrude across boundaries, as they inevitably will, you need a capture and release practice. Briefly acknowledge the intrusive concern, capture it by writing it down or making a note for later, then deliberately release it by returning attention to the current domain. This acknowledges the concern's validity while maintaining the boundaries that protect your effectiveness. Compartmentalization becomes easier with practice as your brain learns to trust the system. Initially, concerns will constantly intrude across boundaries because your brain doesn't believe they'll be addressed otherwise. As you consistently honor your scheduled times for each domain, your brain relaxes its vigilance and allows cleaner separation. This skill is essential for sustained high performance because no one can handle constant, unremitting pressure across all life areas simultaneously. Chapter 11. Building mental calluses through progressive challenges. Your hands develop calluses when repeatedly exposed to friction. The initial exposure causes pain and blisters, but continued exposure transforms soft skin into tough, protective tissue. The same principle applies to your mind. Repeated exposure to stress and challenge creates psychological calluses, increasing your capacity to handle pressure without damage. The parallel is more than metaphorical. Your brain literally changes structure in response to repeated challenges, just as your skin changes in response to friction. Neural pathways that support stress tolerance strengthen with use. Brain regions involved in emotional regulation grow denser with practice. You are physically building a tougher brain through deliberate stress exposure. The key word is progressive. If you expose soft hands to extreme friction immediately, you don't build calluses, you create injuries that set back your development. Similarly, if you expose an untrained mind to extreme pressure immediately, you don't build mental toughness, you create trauma that undermines resilience. Progressive challenge means starting at the edge of your current capacity and gradually increasing difficulty as your capacity grows. This approach keeps you in the growth zone, where challenges are hard enough to stimulate adaptation, but not so hard that they cause breakdown. Mental calluses build through controlled stress exposure, not through overwhelming trauma. The difference between training and trauma is degree and recovery. Training pushes you beyond comfort into growth. Trauma pushes you beyond capacity into damage. The line between them is personal and varies based on your current resilience level. This is why progressive challenge, calibrated to your actual capacity, is essential. Identify the specific types of pressure that currently limit you. Is it social evaluation, physical discomfort, uncertainty, time pressure, performance scrutiny? Each type of pressure requires specific exposure practice to build tolerance. If social evaluation triggers you, progressively increase your exposure to being evaluated, starting with low-stakes situations and gradually raising the stakes as your tolerance grows. A speaker who fears judgment might start by sharing opinions in small group conversations, progress to speaking up in meetings, advance to giving presentations to their team, then to larger audiences, eventually addressing hundreds or thousands of people. Each stage provides the calibrated stress exposure that builds calluses for the next level. Create a progression plan for each pressure type that moves from mildly uncomfortable to significantly challenging over weeks or months. Someone building tolerance to public speaking might start by speaking up more in small meetings, progress to presenting to their team, advance to presenting to larger groups, and eventually speak to audiences that would have terrified them previously. Each stage builds capacity for the next. The discomfort at each level decreases as calluses form, making the next level accessible. Document your progression to track growth that might not be obvious day to day. Looking back at challenges that once seemed overwhelming and recognizing them as now routine provides powerful evidence of development. This evidence builds the self-efficacy pillar discussed earlier, creating a positive cycle where proven growth increases confidence, which enables more growth. Avoid the temptation to skip levels in your progression. Impatience leads people to attempt challenges beyond their current capacity, resulting in failures that undermine confidence rather than build it. Trust the process and respect the timeline. Mental calluses take time to develop, but once formed, they provide lasting protection against the pressures of life. Chapter 12. The opponent process. Using discomfort to create pleasure. Your brain has a fascinating mechanism that transforms your experience of pleasure and pain over time. Called the opponent process, this mechanism automatically generates opposite emotional responses to counterbalance current experiences. When you experience pleasure, your brain generates a counteracting negative response. When you experience discomfort, your brain generates a counteracting positive response. This mechanism exists to maintain emotional homeostasis, preventing you from getting stuck at extreme emotional states. But its implications for mental toughness and happiness are profound and counterintuitive. Most people spend their lives working against this mechanism rather than leveraging it. Understanding this mechanism reveals why pursuing comfort leads to unhappiness and pursuing challenge leads to fulfillment. When you chronically seek pleasure and avoid discomfort, the opponent process makes pleasures less pleasurable, while the removal of those pleasures becomes increasingly painful. You develop tolerance, needing more stimulation to achieve the same effect, while becoming more sensitive to discomfort when pleasures are absent. This is the hedonic treadmill that keeps comfort seekers perpetually dissatisfied. You can see this pattern in addiction. The first experiences of a substance or behavior produce intense pleasure. But with repeated exposure, the opponent process strengthens, and the baseline experience without the stimulus becomes increasingly negative, while the pleasure from the stimulus diminishes. The addict ends up using not to feel good but just to feel normal, trapped by the opponent process they triggered through initial pleasure seeking. But when you deliberately engage with discomfort, the opponent process works in your favor. The discomfort itself triggers an opposing pleasurable response. And over time, the discomfort becomes less uncomfortable while the pleasure generated by completing the challenge increases. This explains the runner's high, the satisfaction of completing hard work, and the deep contentment that follows voluntary suffering. People who embrace difficult challenges often describe a satisfaction unavailable through easy pleasures. Mental toughness training leverages the opponent process by embracing discomfort rather than avoiding it. When you take a cold shower, the initial cold shock is unpleasant. But as you remain in the cold, your brain generates opposing responses that create a powerful sense of aliveness and accomplishment afterward. The post-discomfort positive state far exceeds the neutral state you would have experienced by avoiding the cold entirely. This principle applies to any voluntary discomfort. Hard workouts, difficult conversations, challenging projects, uncomfortable learning experiences. Each generates opponent process responses that create lasting positive states unavailable to those who only pursue comfort. The more you embrace discomfort, the more capacity you develop for experiencing the deep pleasure and satisfaction that emerge from challenge. This understanding transforms your relationship with difficulty. Instead of seeing discomfort as something to avoid, you recognize it as the price of admission for the most meaningful forms of satisfaction. You stop chasing easy pleasures that leave you empty and start pursuing worthy challenges that generate lasting fulfillment. This shift is fundamental to sustainable mental toughness because it aligns your natural motivation system with the behaviors that build strength. Chapter 13. Attention Control. Directing your mind where you choose. Your attention is the lens through which you experience reality. Whatever you focus on expands in your perception, becoming more vivid, significant, and emotionally impactful. Most people let their attention wander freely, following whatever stimuli are most salient, usually threats, problems, and negative possibilities. This default attention pattern creates unnecessary suffering and undermines performance by keeping focus on obstacles rather than solutions. Attention control is the ability to deliberately direct your focus where you choose, rather than letting it be captured by default patterns. This skill is foundational to mental toughness because under pressure, your attention naturally gravitates toward threats and problems. Without deliberate control, you become stuck in worry, rumination, and anxious anticipation rather than effective action. The first principle of attention control is awareness. You must notice where your attention is before you can redirect it. Start practicing attention awareness during calm moments. Set random reminders throughout your day that prompt you to notice where your mind is focused. This practice builds the awareness muscle that allows you to catch runaway attention during stressful moments. The second principle is intentional direction. Once you notice your attention, you can choose where to place it. This choice is a mental muscle that strengthens with use. Practice redirecting attention from unhelpful focus to helpful focus. If you notice you're dwelling on worst-case scenarios, deliberately shift attention to what you can control and what actions you can take. This redirection feels effortful at first, but becomes easier with practice. The third principle is sustained focus. It's not enough to briefly redirect attention. You must maintain focus on your chosen target, despite the pull of distracting concerns. This requires accepting that unhelpful thoughts may continue arising while choosing not to engage with them. Let the thoughts pass through your awareness without following them, like watching cars drive by without chasing them. Under pressure, direct your attention to the present moment and the immediate task rather than future outcomes or past mistakes. Pressure creates a natural tendency to time travel mentally, worrying about what might happen or ruminating about what already happened. Neither of these focuses is useful. What's useful is full attention on what you can do right now. Practice present moment focus through mindfulness training. Even brief daily mindfulness practice, 10 to 15 minutes, significantly improves your ability to control attention under pressure. This training builds the neural circuits for attention control, making them available when you need them most. Chapter 14. The Failure Reframe. Transforming setbacks into stepping stones. Most people experience failure as evidence that they're not capable, not talented enough, or not meant to succeed. This interpretation transforms normal setbacks into psychological wounds that accumulate over time, creating learned helplessness and chronic avoidance of challenge. This relationship with failure is the single biggest obstacle to developing mental toughness, because toughness requires willing engagement with difficulty, and difficulty inevitably produces some failures. Watch how children learn to walk. They fall constantly, dozens, hundreds of times, yet they don't interpret these falls as evidence that walking isn't for them. They don't conclude they lack the walking gene or weren't meant to be bipeds. They simply get up and try again, learning from each fall until walking becomes effortless. Somewhere between childhood and adulthood, most people lose this natural relationship with failure and adopt a fragile interpretation that treats every setback as a verdict on their fundamental worth. Mentally tough people have a fundamentally different relationship with failure. They experience the same disappointing outcomes as everyone else, but they interpret those outcomes differently. Instead of seeing failure as verdict, they see it as data. Instead of viewing setbacks as dead ends, they view them as redirections. Instead of treating struggles as evidence of inadequacy, they treat them as evidence of effort towards something that matters. This reframe isn't denial or toxic positivity. It doesn't pretend failures don't happen or don't hurt. It acknowledges the reality of setback while choosing a meaning that supports growth rather than collapse. The setback is real. What you make it mean is your choice, and that choice has enormous consequences for your psychological state and future behavior. Consider two athletes who both lose an important competition. The first interprets the loss as proof that they're not talented enough, that they don't have what it takes, that they should probably focus their energy elsewhere. This interpretation leads to decreased training, avoidance of future competitions, and gradual withdrawal from the sport. The second interprets the same loss as valuable data about their preparation, strategy, and execution. They analyze what went wrong, adjust their approach, and increase their training intensity, motivated by the gap between their current performance and their goals. Same event, completely different outcomes based entirely on interpretation. Begin by examining your current beliefs about failure. Do you believe failure means you're not capable? Do you think failing at something means you should stop trying? Do you interpret setbacks as permanent rather than temporary? These beliefs, usually formed in childhood, create automatic reactions to failure that undermine resilience. Replace limiting failure beliefs with growth-oriented alternatives. Failure is feedback, not verdict. Setbacks are part of the process, not proof that I'm on the wrong path. Struggling means I'm attempting something difficult, which is evidence of courage, not inadequacy. Everyone who achieves mastery fails repeatedly along the way. These beliefs must be internalized through repetition and through applying them to actual failures in your life. When setbacks occur, consciously practice the new interpretation. What data does this failure provide? What can I learn? How does this redirect me toward a better approach? What does my willingness to fail reveal about my commitment? Over time, this practice rewires your automatic responses to failure, transforming it from threat to teacher. Chapter 15. Building your internal operating system for pressure. Your mind operates on mental software, patterns of thought, response, and interpretation that run automatically without conscious direction. Most people are running outdated software that was installed in childhood, programs designed for a child's understanding of the world that no longer serve adult performance. This legacy software includes beliefs about what you're capable of, interpretations of what stress means, and automatic responses to challenge that were appropriate decades ago but now hold you back. Upgrading your internal operating system means deliberately identifying and replacing the mental programs that undermine your effectiveness under pressure. This isn't a one-time installation, but an ongoing process of noticing unhelpful patterns, designing better alternatives, and practicing the new patterns until they become your default response. Start by mapping your current mental operating system. What automatic thoughts arise when you face challenge? What beliefs do you hold about stress, difficulty, and your ability to cope? What behavioral patterns do you default to under pressure, avoidance, aggression, withdrawal, collapse? This mapping reveals the software currently running your responses so you can identify what needs upgrading. Design replacement programs for each problematic pattern. If your current software says stress is dangerous and should be avoided, design new software that says stress is preparation and should be leveraged. If your current programming produces automatic self-doubt under scrutiny, design new programming that produces curious engagement. Write out your new mental programs explicitly so you can rehearse them. Installation requires repetition. Your old software has been running for years or decades and has deep neural pathways supporting it. New software requires consistent practice to build competing pathways strong enough to override the defaults. Every time you notice the old pattern activating, consciously interrupt it and run the new program instead. This interruption and replacement process, repeated hundreds or thousands of times, gradually shifts your default responses. Use visualization to accelerate installation. Mental rehearsal creates neural pathways similar to physical practice. Spend time each day visualizing yourself, responding to pressure with your upgraded software, seeing yourself remaining calm, confident, and effective when challenges arise. This visualization primes your brain to actually produce these responses when situations occur in reality. Chapter 16. The Stress Capacity Expansion Protocol. Your capacity to handle stress is not fixed. Like a muscle, it can be systematically expanded through proper training. The Stress Capacity Expansion Protocol is a structured approach to increasing how much pressure you can handle before performance degrades, giving you greater resilience for life's inevitable challenges. Most people operate at or near their stress capacity most of the time, which means any additional pressure pushes them into overload and breakdown. By deliberately expanding your capacity, you create a buffer zone that allows you to handle unexpected stress without collapsing. This buffer is the difference between thriving in demanding environments and burning out. The protocol has 3 phases. The first phase is baseline establishment. Before expanding capacity, you need to understand your current limits. Pay attention to your stress signals over 2 to 4 weeks, noting when performance starts degrading, when sleep becomes disrupted, when mood becomes consistently negative, and when health symptoms appear. These markers indicate you're approaching your current capacity ceiling. Knowing your baseline allows you to train just above it without going so far into overload that you cause damage rather than adaptation. This assessment requires honest self-observation. Most people either overestimate their capacity because they want to believe they're tougher than they are, or underestimate it because they've become accustomed to operating in chronic overload. Track your symptoms systematically rather than relying on impression. Note energy levels, sleep quality, mood, health symptoms, and performance quality over several weeks to establish an accurate baseline. The second phase is progressive overload. Once baseline is established, deliberately take on challenges that push slightly beyond your current capacity. This might mean taking on additional responsibilities, setting more ambitious deadlines, or engaging with situations you would normally avoid. The key word is slightly. You're aiming for the training zone just past your current limit, not the breakdown zone far past it. Progressive overload follows the same principle as physical training. Lifting slightly more weight than comfortable stimulates muscle growth. Lifting massively more weight than you can handle causes injury. Similarly, taking on slightly more stress than comfortable stimulates stress capacity growth, while taking on overwhelming stress causes psychological damage that decreases capacity. During this phase, pay attention to your stress recovery. After periods of elevated stress, you need adequate recovery to allow adaptation. Without recovery, progressive overload becomes chronic overload, which depletes rather than expands capacity. Build recovery practices into your protocol, including sufficient sleep, relaxation activities, social connection, and periods of reduced demand. The third phase is consolidation. After a period of progressive overload and recovery, your new capacity must be consolidated through maintenance stress exposure. If you retreat entirely to easy, low-stress conditions, you lose the gains you've made. Maintain exposure to moderate stress that keeps your expanded capacity active without pushing into further growth. Cycle through these phases continuously. After consolidation, begin a new round of progressive overload at your new, higher baseline. Over months and years, this cycling produces dramatic expansion in stress capacity that transforms what you can handle without performance degradation. Chapter 17. Mastering your internal dialogue. The voice in your head narrates your experience constantly, interpreting events, predicting outcomes, and evaluating your performance. For most people, this internal dialogue is predominantly negative, critical, and fear-focused. It points out problems, anticipates disasters, and highlights inadequacies. This negative narrator undermines mental toughness by constantly feeding self-doubt, anxiety, and discouragement into your psychological system. You could call this voice your internal critic, and it's remarkably harsh. It says things to you that you would never say to another person. It predicts failures that never materialize. It reminds you of past mistakes as if they predict future performance. It questions your abilities, your worthiness, your chances of success. And because this voice sounds like your own thoughts, you assume it's telling the truth. But the internal critic is not objective reality. It's a pattern of thinking installed through years of conditioning, and it can be changed. Mastering your internal dialogue means taking control of this narration, shifting from a default critic to a deliberate coach. This doesn't mean silencing the internal voice or pretending problems don't exist. It means directing the voice toward observations and interpretations that support effective action rather than paralysis. The internal coach acknowledges difficulties while focusing on what can be done. It recognizes mistakes while emphasizing what can be learned. It admits fears while highlighting reasons for confidence. The first step is observation without identification. Learn to hear your internal dialogue as thoughts rather than as truth. When the voice says you can't do this, recognize that as a thought arising in consciousness, not as a statement of fact. This separation between thought and identity creates space for choice about whether to believe and follow the thought. Meditation practice helps develop this observer capacity, allowing you to watch thoughts arise without being swept away by them. The second step is source evaluation. Ask yourself whether your internal dialogue sounds more like a supportive coach or an abusive critic. Would you speak to a friend the way you speak to yourself? Would you hire a coach who talked to you this way? Is this dialogue helping you perform better or worse? These questions reveal how dysfunctional most internal dialogue is and create motivation for change. When you realize your internal voice would get fired if it were an external coach, you become more willing to change it. The third step is deliberate replacement. When you notice unhelpful internal dialogue, consciously replace it with more supportive alternatives. If the voice says you're going to fail, replace it with, let's see what happens when you give your best effort. If it says everyone will think you're stupid, replace it with what matters is that you're trying and learning. These replacements feel artificial at first because they contradict your habitual patterns. The fourth step is identity strengthening. Develop an internal coaching voice that you can call upon when the critic appears. This coach knows your strengths, believes in your capacity, and focuses on productive action rather than judgment. When you notice the critic narrating, deliberately switch to the coach voice. Over time, the coach becomes more prominent and the critic more subdued, transforming your internal experience of challenges. Chapter 18. The Emergency Mental Toolkit. Responding to acute pressure. Despite your best training, you will encounter situations that overwhelm your standard coping mechanisms. These acute pressure moments require emergency tools that can rapidly stabilize your psychological state and restore functional capacity. Having these tools ready and practiced ensures you can respond effectively even when normal resilience is insufficient. The first emergency tool is the physiological reset. Under extreme pressure, your body is flooded with stress hormones that impair cognitive function. You cannot think your way out of this state because your thinking apparatus is compromised. You must address the physiological state first. The fastest physiological reset is the dive response, triggered by cold water on your face. Fill a bowl with cold water and submerge your face for 30 seconds while holding your breath. This triggers your mammalian dive reflex, immediately slowing heart rate and shifting your nervous system toward calm. If water isn't available, use intense exercise to burn off stress hormones. Even a few minutes of intense activity can significantly shift your state. The second emergency tool is the grounding technique. When psychological overwhelm causes dissociation or panic, you need to anchor yourself to present reality. The 5-4-3-2-1 technique accomplishes this by engaging all your senses. Identify 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. This exercise pulls your attention away from abstract fears and into concrete present experience, interrupting panic cycles. The third emergency tool is the perspective shift. Under pressure, problems often seem overwhelming because they fill your entire perspective. The perspective shift deliberately zooms out to place current challenges in broader context. Ask yourself how much this will matter in 5 years, what advice you would give a friend facing this same situation, and what this challenge looks like compared to real tragedies. This questioning doesn't minimize genuine problems, but restores proportional perception. The fourth emergency tool is the ally invocation. Bring to mind someone who believes in you unconditionally, whether alive, deceased, real, or fictional. Imagine them present with you, offering support and perspective. What would they say? What would they remind you of? This technique activates attachment system calming that can rapidly reduce distress. Practice these emergency tools during non-emergency times so they're available when you need them. Run through each technique monthly so you can execute them automatically when acute pressure strikes. Having these tools ready provides confidence that you can handle whatever comes, because you have proven methods for managing even extreme psychological states. Chapter 19: Building Mental Endurance for Long-Term Challenges. Mental toughness isn't just about handling acute pressure, it's also about sustaining effort, focus, and resilience over extended periods. Many challenges in life, building a business, raising children, recovering from illness, pursuing mastery, require not just intense effort but sustained effort over months or years. Mental endurance is the capacity for this sustained engagement, and it requires specific training distinct from acute stress management. Acute toughness and endurance toughness are different capacities that require different development approaches. Someone might handle a crisis brilliantly, but burn out after 6 months of sustained moderate pressure. Someone else might seem unremarkable in crisis situations but possess the endurance to maintain consistent effort across years. Both capacities are valuable, and complete mental toughness requires developing both. Mental endurance depends on energy management rather than energy depletion. Most people approach long-term challenges by pushing hard until they're exhausted, recovering briefly, then pushing hard again. This cycle of depletion and recovery eventually breaks down as the recovery periods become insufficient to restore baseline function. The result is accumulating fatigue that eventually forces a complete stop, often through illness, burnout, or breakdown. Sustainable endurance requires operating at a pace you can maintain indefinitely. This means intentionally leaving capacity in reserve rather than running at maximum constantly. It means building recovery into your regular routine rather than waiting for breakdown to force rest. It means attending to the fundamentals of physical health, including sleep, nutrition, and exercise, that provide the energy substrate for mental effort. Ironically, many hard-charging individuals fail to develop endurance precisely because they're so capable of intense effort. They can push through fatigue signals that would stop others, accessing reserves that others can't reach. This capacity becomes their downfall when applied to long-term challenges because they deplete reserves that should be conserved for genuine emergencies. Mental endurance also requires meaning maintenance. Over long challenges, the initial excitement and motivation fade. The project that seemed thrilling at the start becomes tedious. The goal that seemed urgent becomes abstract. The purpose that seemed clear becomes foggy. What sustains effort when enthusiasm disappears is connection to purpose that transcends momentary feeling. Regularly reconnect with why you're pursuing this challenge and what it means in the larger context of your life. This connection provides fuel when inspiration fails. Build endurance incrementally by gradually extending your capacity for sustained focus and effort. If you can currently work with deep focus for 2 hours before needing a break, practice extending that to 2.5 hours, then 3 hours. If you can currently maintain consistent effort toward a goal for 3 months before burning out, design your next challenge to require 4 months. This progressive extension builds the mental endurance capacity you need for life's longer challenges. Chapter 20. The Identity Shift. Becoming someone who is mentally tough. The deepest level of mental toughness isn't about techniques or strategies. It's about identity. When mental toughness becomes who you are rather than what you do, it no longer requires effort or decision. You simply respond to challenges the way mentally tough people respond, because that's the kind of person you are. Identity level change is the ultimate goal of mental toughness training because it makes resilience automatic and effortless. Think about the difference between trying to be honest and being an honest person. Someone trying to be honest must make conscious decisions about whether to tell the truth in each situation. They weigh options, consider consequences, and deliberate before speaking. Someone who is an honest person doesn't experience this decision process. They simply tell the truth because that's who they are. The behavior flows from identity without effort or deliberation. Mental toughness works the same way. At the technique level, you must consciously decide to apply strategies when pressure arises. At the identity level, resilient responses emerge automatically because they're expressions of who you are, not performances you're attempting. This is why two people can know the same strategies but produce completely different results. The one for whom toughness has become identity applies those strategies naturally and consistently. The one still operating at technique level applies them inconsistently and with effort. Identity shifts happen through accumulated evidence. You cannot simply decide to be mentally tough and have your identity instantly change. You must accumulate proof through experience that supports the new identity. Every time you face a challenge and respond with resilience, you create evidence for the identity of someone who is mentally tough. Over time, this evidence becomes compelling enough that your self-concept shifts. This understanding reveals the importance of taking action even when you don't feel mentally tough. Each action provides an opportunity to create identity evidence. If you wait until you feel tough to act tough, you never create the evidence that shifts identity. By acting courageous despite fear, persisting despite doubt, and engaging despite wanting to avoid, you generate the experiences that transform who you believe yourself to be. The actions come first. The identity follows. Use identity-based language to accelerate this shift. Instead of saying, "I'm trying to be more mentally tough," say, "I'm becoming someone who is mentally tough," or "I'm the kind of person who faces challenges head-on." This language frames mental toughness as an emerging identity rather than a distant goal, making it more psychologically accessible. Surround yourself with people who embody the identity you're developing. You absorb the beliefs, behaviors, and self-concepts of those you spend time with. Being around mentally tough people accelerates your own identity shift by providing models, social proof, and environmental reinforcement for your emerging self-concept. Chapter 21. Advanced Visualization. Programming your mind for pressure performance. Visualization is one of the most powerful and underutilized tools for mental toughness development. Research shows that mental rehearsal activates similar neural pathways to physical practice, allowing you to train your brain's responses without waiting for real situations to occur. Advanced visualization goes beyond simple positive imaging to systematically program your mind for effective performance under any conditions. The first level of visualization is outcome visualization, imagining yourself achieving your desired goals. This level is useful for motivation, but insufficient for mental toughness. You must also practice process visualization, imagining yourself executing the specific actions and responses that lead to success. See yourself remaining calm when pressure mounts, persisting when obstacles appear, and recovering quickly from setbacks. The second level is adversity visualization. Most people only visualize things going well. Mentally tough people also visualize things going wrong and see themselves responding effectively. Imagine specific challenges arising, setbacks occurring, and pressure intensifying. Then visualize yourself handling each difficulty with skill and composure. This programming prepares your brain to produce effective responses when difficulties actually arise, rather than being surprised and overwhelmed. The third level is identity visualization. Visualize yourself as someone who is genuinely mentally tough. See yourself moving through the world with quiet confidence, facing challenges without anxiety, and responding to setbacks with resilience. Feel what it feels like to be this person. This identity visualization accelerates the self-concept shift discussed in the previous chapter by providing vivid mental experiences of your emerging identity. Practice visualization for 10 to 15 minutes daily, ideally in a relaxed state when your subconscious mind is most receptive. Be as specific and sensory-rich as possible, including not just images but sounds, feelings, and physical sensations. The more vivid and realistic your visualization, the more effectively it programs your neural pathways for real-world performance. Chapter 22. The Recovery Protocol. Preventing breakdown and sustaining gains. Mental toughness training involves deliberate stress exposure, but stress without adequate recovery leads to breakdown rather than growth. Your recovery protocol is as important as your challenge protocol because it determines whether you adapt and grow stronger or accumulate damage that eventually causes collapse. Recovery is not weakness. It's the essential complement to stress that enables long-term toughness development. The fitness world understands this principle well. Athletes don't grow stronger during workouts. They grow stronger during recovery from workouts. The workout provides the stimulus for growth. Recovery provides the conditions for that growth to occur. Without adequate recovery, additional workouts produce declining returns and eventually cause overtraining syndrome, where performance decreases despite increased training effort. Mental toughness works identically. Stress exposure provides the stimulus for psychological growth. Recovery provides the conditions for that growth to occur. Without recovery, additional stress produces declining psychological returns and eventually causes burnout, depression, or breakdown. Many highly motivated people fail to develop mental toughness precisely because they never recover adequately from their stress exposure. Physical recovery includes adequate sleep, which is non-negotiable for mental toughness. During sleep, your brain consolidates learning, clears metabolic waste, and restores neurotransmitter balances depleted by stress. Chronic sleep deprivation undermines every aspect of mental toughness, regardless of how well you've trained other elements. Aim for 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep as a foundational recovery practice. Research consistently shows that sleep deprivation impairs emotional regulation, decision-making, stress tolerance, and cognitive function. These are precisely the capacities mental toughness requires. Trying to build mental toughness while chronically sleep-deprived is like trying to build muscle while fasting. The building blocks aren't available for construction. Mental recovery includes activities that restore cognitive resources depleted by sustained effort and stress. These activities vary by individual but often include time in nature, creative pursuits, social connection, and mindfulness practice. Identify what genuinely restores your mental energy rather than what merely distracts you from tiredness. Scrolling social media might feel like a break but often depletes rather than restores mental resources. True mental recovery requires disengagement from demanding tasks and engagement with restorative activities. Emotional recovery includes processing and releasing the emotional residue that accumulates from stressful experiences. This might involve journaling, talking with trusted friends or therapists, or practices like meditation that allow emotions to move through you without becoming stuck. Unprocessed emotions accumulate as psychological debt that eventually demands payment through burnout, anxiety, or depression. Build recovery into your schedule proactively rather than waiting for breakdown to force it. Schedule daily recovery time, weekly recovery activities, and periodic longer recovery periods. Treat these recovery appointments with the same seriousness as work commitments because they enable sustained high performance rather than opposing it. Chapter 23. Stress Chemistry. Understanding and optimizing your biological responses. Your response to pressure involves complex chemical processes that can be understood and optimized. Knowing how stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline work, how neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin affect your state, and how you can influence these systems gives you additional leverage for managing pressure. This knowledge transforms stress from a mysterious force that happens to you into a biological process you can work with. Cortisol is your primary stress hormone, released by your adrenal glands when your brain perceives threat or challenge. In the short term, cortisol increases alertness and energy availability. But chronic cortisol elevation damages virtually every system in your body and brain, impairing memory, weakening immunity, and disrupting mood regulation. Mental toughness training aims to produce appropriate cortisol responses that are strong enough for performance, but don't become chronic. You can influence cortisol through lifestyle factors. Regular exercise, adequate sleep, and social connection all help regulate cortisol. Chronic stress without recovery elevates baseline cortisol, making you more reactive to future stress. Recovery practices that lower cortisol, like meditation, time in nature, and relaxation, help maintain a healthy baseline that allows appropriate stress responses without chronic elevation. Dopamine is your motivation and reward neurotransmitter. It drives you toward goals and creates the satisfaction of achievement. Mental toughness relies on healthy dopamine function because it provides the motivation to engage with challenges. Dopamine can be depleted by chronic stress or hijacked by easy pleasures that provide intense stimulation without meaningful achievement. Protecting dopamine function through limiting excessive stimulation and pursuing meaningful accomplishments supports sustained motivation for difficult challenges. The physiological interventions discussed earlier, such as controlled breathing, cold exposure, and exercise, all work partly through chemical mechanisms. Understanding why these interventions work increases your commitment to practicing them and helps you use them strategically when specific chemical states are needed. Chapter 24. Building your pressure practice routine. Consistent practice is what transforms mental toughness knowledge into mental toughness capacity. Most people read about resilience, feel temporarily inspired, and then return to their normal patterns without implementing anything. This approach produces no lasting change. Real transformation requires a structured practice routine that systematically develops each aspect of mental toughness over time. Your pressure practice routine should include daily elements, weekly elements, and periodic intensive elements. Daily elements are brief practices that maintain and gradually build capacity. These include morning cold exposure, breathwork practice, visualization sessions, and attention control training. Each daily element takes 5 to 15 minutes and compounds over time into significant development. Weekly elements are more substantial practices that provide deeper training stimulus. These might include extended discomfort challenges, intensive visualization sessions, deliberate practice of communication or performance under simulated pressure, or review and planning sessions for your mental toughness development. Weekly elements might take 30 to 90 minutes and should push beyond your comfort zone. Periodic intensive elements are occasional deep dives that provide significant stress inoculation and capacity expansion. These might include multi-day challenges like retreats, competitions, or adventure experiences that test your limits, formal training programs or courses, or self-designed intensive challenges that push significantly beyond normal comfort zones. These elements might occur monthly or quarterly depending on your development stage. Structure your routine on paper and treat it as seriously as any other important commitment. Track your practice to maintain accountability and observe progress over time. Adjust your routine based on results, increasing challenge in areas showing progress and providing additional support in areas where you're struggling. This structured approach transforms good intentions into actual mental toughness development. Chapter 25. Handling criticism, rejection, and failure without damage. 3 experiences undermine mental toughness more than almost anything else. Criticism makes you question your competence. Rejection makes you question your worth. Failure makes you question your capacity. Most people are so wounded by these experiences that they structure their entire lives around avoiding them, which guarantees limited achievement and fragile self-esteem. Developing immunity to criticism, rejection, and failure liberates you to take the risks necessary for significant accomplishment. Consider how much of human behavior is driven by avoidance of these 3 experiences. People stay in jobs they hate to avoid the rejection of job searching. They don't share creative work to avoid criticism. They don't attempt challenging goals to avoid failure. They play small because playing big exposes them to experiences they're not equipped to handle. This avoidance comes at an enormous cost: the unlived life, the untaken risks, the unrealized potential, all sacrificed on the altar of avoiding temporary psychological discomfort. Begin by understanding that these experiences feel threatening because of how you interpret them, not because of anything inherent in the experiences themselves. Criticism is information about one person's perspective, not objective truth about your value. Rejection is information about fit or timing, not a verdict on your worthiness. Failure is information about your approach, not proof of your inadequacy. These reframes must be practiced repeatedly until they become your default interpretation. Your current interpretations were installed over years of social conditioning. They won't change after one reading. They change through repeated application to actual experiences of criticism, rejection, and failure. Desensitization is powerful for building immunity. If criticism devastates you, deliberately seek out criticism until it loses its power. Ask for feedback, post content publicly, and put yourself in situations where criticism is likely. Each experience of surviving criticism builds evidence that criticism won't destroy you. The same principle applies to rejection and failure. Seek them out in low-stakes situations to build tolerance for higher-stakes encounters. Jia Jiang, author of Rejection Proof, spent 100 days deliberately seeking rejection by making outlandish requests. He asked to make announcements over Costco loudspeakers, requested a free room at a hotel, and attempted to play soccer in a stranger's backyard. Through this exposure, he transformed from someone paralyzed by rejection fear to someone who could handle any rejection with equanimity. The experience didn't eliminate his dislike of rejection, but it eliminated rejection's power over his behavior. Develop your own evaluation standards that are more important to you than external judgments. When you have clear internal criteria for success, external criticism becomes less destabilizing because it's just one input among many. When you know your own worth independent of others' acceptance, rejection loses its devastating impact. When you measure progress by your own metrics, failure becomes feedback rather than verdict. Chapter 26. Mental Toughness in Relationships, Protecting Your Resilience from Others. Your mental toughness doesn't exist in isolation. It exists in relationship with others who can either support or undermine your psychological strength. Understanding how to protect your resilience from negative influences while leveraging positive relationships is essential for maintaining mental toughness in the real world. Some people chronically drain mental energy and undermine resilience. These energy vampires might criticize constantly, create drama, dump their problems without reciprocation, or subtly undermine your confidence. Continued exposure to these individuals depletes the psychological resources you need for facing life's challenges. Protecting your mental toughness requires limiting exposure to draining relationships and establishing boundaries that prevent others' dysfunction from becoming your burden. Other people expand mental energy and reinforce resilience. These energizers believe in you, challenge you to grow, celebrate your wins, and provide support during difficulties. Deliberately cultivating relationships with energizing people creates an environment that supports mental toughness development. You become like those you spend time with, so surround yourself with people who embody the strength you're developing. Relationship boundaries protect your mental space from invasion. Learn to say no to demands that exceed appropriate limits. Stop absorbing others' emotions as if they were your own. Refuse to engage in conflicts that don't concern you. These boundaries aren't selfish. They're necessary for maintaining the psychological integrity that allows you to be genuinely helpful to others rather than depleted and resentful. Chapter 27. Situational Mental Toughness. Adapting your approach to context. Different situations require different applications of mental toughness. The approach that works for physical challenges differs from what works for emotional challenges. The strategies for acute crises differ from those for chronic difficulties. The tactics for competitive situations differ from those for collaborative ones. Developing situational awareness about mental toughness allows you to apply the right tools at the right time. Physical challenges primarily require body-mind integration. Your physical state profoundly influences your mental state, so focusing on physiology through breathing, movement, and posture provides leverage. Physical challenges also respond well to compartmentalization, focusing only on the next step rather than the entire challenge, and to the 40% rule, pushing past the brain's conservative quit signals. Emotional challenges primarily require acceptance and processing rather than suppression or avoidance. Trying to tough out emotions by ignoring them backfires, as suppressed emotions accumulate and eventually overwhelm. Emotional mental toughness means experiencing difficult emotions fully while maintaining functional capacity, allowing feelings to exist without being controlled by them. Intellectual challenges primarily require attention control and cognitive restructuring. Under intellectual pressure, your thinking can become narrow and repetitive, cycling through the same unproductive thoughts. Breaking these cycles through deliberate attention redirection and questioning distorted thinking restores intellectual flexibility. Social challenges primarily require self-validation and perspective. When facing social pressure, criticism, or rejection, maintaining a stable sense of your own worth independent of others' opinions is essential. This self-validation, combined with perspective about what social situations actually mean and don't mean, allows you to navigate social pressure without psychological damage. Chapter 28. The compound effect of daily mental toughness practice. Mental toughness development follows the compound interest principle. Small daily investments accumulate over time into massive returns. A single cold shower builds minimal toughness. 1,000 cold showers over 3 years fundamentally transforms your relationship with discomfort. A single difficult conversation builds minimal confidence. Hundreds of difficult conversations over years make you someone who handles conflict with ease. The math of compounding is counterintuitive. In the early stages, progress seems negligible. After 10 cold showers, you don't feel dramatically different. After 20 difficult conversations, your fear hasn't disappeared. The changes are so gradual they're invisible on any given day. But compounding works through exponential curves, where growth accelerates over time. What seems like minimal progress early becomes dramatic transformation later. This compound effect means that consistency matters far more than intensity. Sporadic, intense efforts produce minimal lasting change because they don't allow the accumulation that creates transformation. Consistent, modest efforts produce dramatic results because each small investment builds on previous investments. The person who practices mental toughness skills for 15 minutes daily will far surpass the person who does occasional weekend warrior training. Missing a day breaks the chain of accumulation, so protecting your daily practice is essential. Each day you practice adds to the foundation. Each day you skip fails to add and slightly erodes what's been built. Over time, these daily choices compound into the difference between transformation and stagnation. This is why developing identity-level commitment to practice matters more than motivation. You won't feel motivated every day, but if mental toughness practice is part of who you are, you do it regardless of motivation, just as you brush your teeth regardless of whether you feel like it. The compound effect operates not just on skills but on identity. Each day you practice mental toughness, you provide evidence that you're the kind of person who does hard things. This evidence accumulates until it reaches a tipping point where your self-concept shifts. Once identity shifts, mental toughness becomes self-sustaining because you act in accordance with who you believe you are. This identity compounding explains why some people seem to develop mental toughness quickly while others struggle for years. The fast developers aren't necessarily more talented, they're more consistent, accumulating daily evidence that compounds into identity transformation. Track your practice to make the compound effect visible. Review your tracking weekly and monthly to observe accumulation that might not be apparent day to day. This visibility provides motivation during the early stages, when individual practice sessions don't seem to produce noticeable results. Looking back at weeks of consistent practice builds confidence that transformation is underway, even when you can't feel it directly. Trust the compound effect and maintain practice consistency, knowing that transformation is accumulating beneath the surface. Chapter 29. Integrating mental toughness into every area of your life. Mental toughness is not a compartmentalized skill that only applies to specific challenges. It's a fundamental capacity that affects every area of your life when fully developed. The goal is integration, where mental toughness becomes your default response to all of life's demands, rather than a special mode you activate for exceptional circumstances. Most people think of mental toughness as something they need only in extreme situations. They save their resilience for the big moments, the crises, the obvious challenges. But this compartmentalized approach produces inconsistent toughness that's unreliable when needed and atrophies from underuse. True mental toughness is integrated into the fabric of daily life, expressed in small moments as much as large ones. Integration means applying mental toughness principles to minor daily frustrations, not just major crises. Traffic jams, delayed flights, rude service, minor setbacks. These ordinary annoyances are training opportunities. Each time you respond with equanimity rather than frustration, you strengthen your mental toughness neural pathways. Each time you let small things trigger you, you reinforce reactivity patterns that undermine resilience when it matters most. The person who rages at traffic but claims to be mentally tough in important situations is fooling themselves. Neural pathways don't distinguish between important and unimportant triggers. The patterns you practice with small frustrations are the patterns that activate when big challenges arise. Integration means bringing toughness training into your work, relationships, health practices, and personal development. At work, seek out challenging projects rather than avoiding them. Volunteer for presentations that scare you. Take on responsibilities that stretch your capacity. These choices provide daily stress inoculation that builds workplace resilience. In relationships, have difficult conversations rather than avoiding conflict. Address issues early rather than letting resentment build. Express needs clearly rather than hoping others will guess. Relationship toughness requires the same principles as other forms, facing discomfort rather than avoiding it. In health, choose challenging exercises rather than comfortable ones. Push past the point where your brain tells you to stop. Maintain discipline when motivation fades. Physical toughness and mental toughness are deeply connected, and training one reinforces the other. In personal development, push into discomfort zones rather than staying safe. Learn skills that frustrate you. Attempt projects that might fail. Accept feedback that challenges your self-image. Growth requires discomfort, and integrated mental toughness means accepting discomfort as a permanent companion on the development path. Integration means recognizing that life itself is the ultimate mental toughness training ground. You don't need to create artificial challenges when life provides endless real ones. Every difficulty you face is an opportunity to practice the skills you're developing. Every setback is a chance to apply your reframe. Every pressure situation is a test of your training. The person who approaches life this way develops faster than the person who only practices in designated training sessions. Chapter 30. Becoming Unbreakable. Your Mental Toughness Mastery Path. You now have a complete system for training your mind to stay tough in any situation. You understand the psychology and neuroscience of mental toughness. You have specific techniques for managing stress, controlling attention, restructuring thoughts, and building resilience. You know how to design training progressions, protect your recovery, and integrate toughness into daily life. The question is no longer whether you can become mentally tough. The question is whether you will commit to the practice that produces transformation. Think about where you were when you started this audiobook and where you could be a year from now if you implement what you've learned. Imagine facing pressures that once overwhelmed you with calm, clear-headed effectiveness. Imagine pursuing goals you once considered impossible because fear of failure no longer paralyzes you. Imagine responding to setbacks with curiosity and determination rather than despair and withdrawal. This transformation is available to you, but it requires more than knowledge. It requires action sustained over time. Knowledge without application produces nothing. The concepts in this audiobook have no power until you implement them consistently over time. Reading about cold showers doesn't build toughness. Taking cold showers daily builds toughness. Understanding stress reframing intellectually doesn't help under pressure. Practicing stress reframing until it becomes automatic helps under pressure. Information alone changes nothing. Applied information changes everything. Commitment to the path means deciding that mental toughness development is a priority, not just an interest. It means scheduling your practice and protecting that schedule against competing demands. It means continuing when motivation fades, when progress seems slow, and when life makes practice inconvenient. It means trusting the compound effect through the early stages when results aren't visible. Most people abandon development paths when initial enthusiasm fades and results haven't yet materialized. They mistake the absence of visible progress for the absence of actual progress. But transformation is happening beneath the surface, in neural connections being strengthened, in stress tolerances being expanded, in automatic responses being rewired. The path to mental toughness mastery is not linear. You will have periods of rapid progress and periods of plateau. You will have days when practice feels powerful and days when it feels pointless. You will have setbacks that test everything you've learned. These fluctuations are normal and don't indicate failure. What matters is continued engagement with the process over months and years. The overnight success is a myth. Behind every person who appears to have transformed quickly lies months or years of invisible preparation. What looks like sudden change is actually the visible emergence of changes that accumulated gradually below the surface. Your transformation will follow the same pattern. Invisible at first, then suddenly visible when the accumulated changes reach a tipping point. As you walk this path, you will gradually transform. Situations that once overwhelmed you will become manageable. Pressures that once triggered anxiety will become stimulating. Setbacks that once discouraged you will become interesting problems to solve. You will develop a quiet confidence that doesn't need external validation because it's based on proven capacity to handle whatever comes. You will become someone others turn to in crisis, not because you've appointed yourself their leader, but because your calm, clear-headed presence naturally draws people seeking stability in chaos. This transformation doesn't happen to you. It happens through you, through your daily choices to engage with discomfort, to practice your skills, to apply your training when it matters. You are not a passive recipient of mental toughness. You are the architect of your own psychological strength. Every day, you are building the mind that will face tomorrow's challenges. The world needs people who can stay tough when things fall apart. It needs people who can lead when others panic, persist when others quit, and maintain clarity when chaos surrounds them. By developing your mental toughness, you become one of these people. You become a source of strength for yourself and everyone whose life you touch. You become living proof that mental toughness can be developed, inspiring others to begin their own transformation journeys. Your mental toughness journey starts now, with your very next choice. Will you take the cold shower or avoid it? Will you have the difficult conversation or postpone it? Will you engage with the challenge or retreat to safety? These small choices, made consistently over time, determine whether you become someone who is mentally tough or remain someone who wishes they were. The choice is yours, and it's available to you right now, in this moment, and in every moment that follows. Your mind can be trained to stay tough in any situation. The only question remaining is whether you will do the training. Your future self, the one who needs this toughness when life gets hard, is counting on you to make the right choice. Everything you want, everything you dream of becoming, everything you hope to achieve, lies on the other side of the challenges you're tempted to avoid. Mental toughness is the key that unlocks access to that future. You now have the blueprint for developing that key. The only question is what you'll do with it.